In 1823, the United States was approaching its 50th anniversary, which would be in 1826. And there was a real feeling, a strong feeling on President Monroe's part, who was incidentally the last of our founding father presidents, that America, the United States, had finally arrived as a world power on the world stage. It was the era of good feelings, as they called it. And it was under President Monroe that they issued an invitation to the surviving signers of the Declaration of Independence, our nation's birth certificate, of which there were only 3 still living, and the surviving generals, of which there was only one, the Frenchman Lafayette, to come to the United States and help to celebrate our 50th anniversary. And amongst the things that were asked to be done by President Monroe, he asked his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, to try to get a copy of the nation's birth certificate. You see, for many years, the original Declaration hadn't been taken very good care of, even though we didn't know much about taking care of documents at that time. For instance, it almost was destroyed by the British when the city of Washington, D.C. and the White House were burned to the ground. If it hadn't been for Dolly Madison deciding she wasn't leaving town to be with her husband, who the president, James Madison, who'd been father of the Constitution, had been moved out of the area and was watching from a hillside Washington burned to the ground, not knowing if his wife had escaped the house or not. She refused to go, Dolly, because she said there were a couple of things that she wanted to put on her carriage. She wanted to put the original Declaration of Independence, our original Constitution — they were both kept at the White House at the time — and the Bill of Rights. And she also wanted that picture above the stairway of George Washington leaning on his cannon. The documents weren't that tough because they were rolled up and stuck on her carriage, but the big painting was something else. And they finally had to bring in a guy with an axe who had to axe the nearly foot-wide frame off of Washington's picture. And the Gilbert Stuart painting of Washington leaning on the cannon was saved. In fact, it still sits in the same place above the stairway in the White House. She saved those. And she was a national hero, not just for doing that, but Dolly was very much loved. She was a lady that was always very stylish. She stood 7 or 8 inches taller than her husband, who was at 5'4", was our shortest president, but one of our giants because he was the father of the Constitution. At any rate, Dolly Madison saved it one time. For years, it was taped up because we thought, hey, you know, it belongs to the people. This government's different. And so it was taped up to a west-facing wall, a window rather, glass, at the old U.S. Patent Office in Washington, until some official was walking by one day and thought, I can't read that well. You know, there's something wrong with the writing on that. Didn't know a whole lot about fading, but it was fading. And it was written on vellum, which is calfskin. So it was ordered to be taken down. It had been almost 20 years in that window, facing the sun every day. And it was taken down. 1 week later, the Patent Office burned to the ground. The document has been miraculously saved several times. During both World Wars, it was taken out of Washington, D.C. Second World War, it was kept in Fort Knox along with the crown jewels of England and a bunch of other things that were important to our allies that were safe kept there. But it was in 1823 that President Monroe ordered John Quincy Adams to try to figure out how to make a copy. Now, this is years before photography. The first photograph ever taken was taken in France in 1826. And photography itself didn't catch on until the 30s and 40s. In some areas, not till the 50s, 1850s. But how do you get a copy of a big document? This is the actual size. How do you get a copy of a big document, you know, this size without photography? Well, they hired a sculptor by the name of William J. Stone. And Stone figured out how to do it. What he did was he used a wet plate on the original document, lifted some of the ink that was remaining, and then engraved the thing on a copper plate. And so really the copper plate is now the original of the Declaration of Independence because much of it is irreadable. If you go back to the National Archives, you can read in Congress, you can read part of the top line, very few of the other lines, and almost none of the signatures. You can tell it's been signed by John Hancock, but very few of the other names are well enough written to see them. What you've been looking at your entire life is a stone facsimile that was created for the 50th anniversary of independence. It did survive because of Mr. Stone's engraving. And for many decades, they never put the stone facsimile, the actual stone plate anyway, on display. Now, since they remodeled the National Archives, the original stone plate is also framed up, although it's all in reverse. It's framed up on a wall, so you can see it there permanently now. And of course, the Declaration of Independence is saved now too. Now, I've got to jump back a little bit in this story and tell you one other. And that is that this is our nation's birth certificate, but the original was lost. Because by law, the thing I'm showing you here is the original. But the original was lost. It was sent to the printer Dunlap on the evening of July 4th and 5th of 1776 by the Congress. It only had two names on it. It was set in print by Dunlap and published. 23 known copies of the Dunlap broadside. Very rare pieces. The last Dunlap broadside, and they only contain the name of John Hancock and Charles Thompson, the permanent secretary, who did not sign this original. He was the permanent secretary of Congress during that period. Those are the only two names you'd find on the Declaration of Independence as it was published. And the only two names that the king knew were on this document for the first year and a half till they issued a list of the other names that had signed their death warrants by signing this document. The original went to the printer and was lost. And there's been big arguments over the years as to whether Charles Thompson, the secretary, lost it or Dunlap lost it. I vote for Dunlap since Charles Thompson was so meticulous and even pasted a broadside printing of it in the official minutes of Congress since the original had been lost. And I think somebody needs to go home and look around their attics and other places and see if you can find our original Declaration of Independence. We don't even know exactly what it looks like. But I'm sure you'd get acquainted on a first-name basis with the FBI within hours if you found it. At any rate, on July 17th, 1776, a full 13 days after the date on the document, the United States Congress, under John Hancock, made a resolution that we need an original. We've lost our original. And so they got Timothy Matlack, the best calligrapher they knew, to draw up the document that's before you. And they voted this is now the original Declaration of Independence. And so the original is no longer lost, although it's lost. And so this is the original by law. Matlack didn't finish this till August 2nd, okay, 1776. So Hancock could not have signed this document, even though he signed the original on the 4th, till August 2nd. I hold in my hand a letter signed by John Hancock 8 days later, okay, on August 10th. Now, we always hear the story that Hancock wrote his signature so large so that old John Bull, or King George, England, could read his name without their spectacles on, okay? Only this is a letter appointing James Clinton a brigadier general in the American Army as President of Congress, which he signed 8 days later. And I put the one over the other. And they look pretty identical in size. So if he did it for John Bull, he liked it. He continued to sign the same size, okay? You know, when the story becomes history, when the legend becomes history, we forget about the story. And there's another good example of it. But this document has survived. What's really important about it are the ideas and thoughts expressed. We know that Adams and Franklin helped make some changes. The Congress took a third of it away from what Jefferson had written. And that one of the few things that Jefferson resisted in the document being taken out of Congress was calling the king a tyrant. And among the collectibles I have is a first British printing in a magazine of the Declaration of Independence, when every time the king is referred to as a tyrant, it's T blank. And I guess the British had to fill it in, but the Americans knew what it stood for.